Welcome to I'd Podcast That, your weekly no-nonsense actionable guidance to get your podcast off the ground or to the next level. And now to your host, Brian Colburn.
Hey, thanks for joining me, podcasters. Today, I want to talk about 9 tips to improving your podcast as you're producing it. I'm a firm believer that if you've got a great idea, get started. Make improvements along the way. Your audience will appreciate it. Now, with that having been said, you need to have an acceptable level of audio for a podcast. So ensure those things are in place, but then you can make improvements along the way. And I'm going to cover 9 things to help you do that. But before we get started, this episode is brought to you by Sitch Radio. If you need podcast production services, check out sitchradio.com. You can reach out to them there, and they can help you along the way with any of these 9 tips and more. Getting into it, I've been involved in over 190 episodes across 7 shows in the last couple of years. So I've got some experience, and I'm still constantly improving my podcast production, my podcast skills. You add new hardware, you learn new hardware that can elevate the quality of your show. So it's never a done deal. Technology is always changing. And that's one of the points we're going to talk to about. But we're going to run through these 9 things and then cover them in detail a little bit more. Number 1, have an open mind. Number 2, have a good media host. Number 3, establish a web presence. Number 4, planning. 5, leverage social media. 6, learn to edit. 7, always do a sound check. 8, record, do a rough edit, and listen. And finally, number 9, engage with your audience. So, open mind. What I want to talk about here is, I briefly touched on it during the intro, but have an open mind. New hardware is always being produced. New software is always being produced. And implementing a piece of hardware or a new piece of software into your production can improve the value of your show, can improve the audio quality. There's several things that those 2 things can do to help produce a better show. I'm not saying go out and spend a lot of money. I'm saying strategically learn, implement, and improve the quality of your show. But number 1, you have to have an open mind. You have to set aside time to see what new items are there. Number 2, take the time to evaluate them and learn them. 3, implement them into your show and up that quality. So you have to have an open mind to do this. Listen to everybody, learn. If you're podcasting, you should be listening to podcasts like this one. I'd podcast that. So you can learn new things to improve the quality of your show. So number 2, a good media host. I've worked with Libsyn, Podbean, Spreaker. Those are the 3 primary platforms that I work with right now. They all have pluses and minuses. I'm enjoying the Spreaker platform the most. It is a little more expensive, but the tools that it gives you is really cool. For example, I do a daily Amazon flash brief, and sometimes I might get a little behind in production. From my phone, I can do a live to I'd podcast that daily. I can move yesterday's show into archives. It's phenomenal what I can do on my phone. Now, the audio quality is not what this is. However, I'm still producing that piece of content that people are expecting daily. Having a good media host in your back pocket is paramount. Number 3, a good web presence. You are growing an audience, and eventually you're going to want to drive that traffic to your website. On a website, you can engage with them differently than you can by them just listening to audio. You can build an email list. You can pitch products. On that web platform, you can sell banner ad space. There's tons of things you can do. I'm not saying every podcast out of the gate needs a website, but plan eventually on having a website at some point. And Sitch Radio, if you're new to podcasting, thinking about starting a podcast, Sitch Radio will give you a page that your podcast can live on. It has a media player with all your episodes. And then down below, you can even have a post per episode with transcripts, show notes, external links, things of that nature. So if you want to get started and you don't want to build out a web page or a website, check out Sitch and see what they have to offer. Number 4, planning. You know I'm big on planning. It is paramount that you plan. If you're new to podcasting and go to sitchradio.com, they have a download that will kind of walk you through the starting processes of planning a podcast. You should check that out. But planning is very, very important. The better you plan in the beginning, before you even buy a microphone, before you even push record, the better your show is going to come out once you do record it. On to number 5, leverage social media. Advertisers want to get in front of your audience. You can build an audience for the audio file, the podcast. You can also build an audience via social media. Just started a project 3 weeks ago now, and our Instagram following is up over 100. Our Facebook following is suffering. Our Twitter following's about 50 people. So in 3 weeks, we're fostering that audience there. But it makes it easy for people to share your posts. It's also growing an audience that you can leverage for that advertiser and maybe do a sponsored post outside of the physical podcast. Keep that in mind. Utilize social media platforms to grow and foster and engage with your audience differently than the podcast, and you might be able to leverage that for a potential advertiser down the road. Number 6, learn to edit. With Audacity, it's pretty straightforward. Tons of YouTube videos, tips and tricks on how to edit audio in Audacity. It's going to give you an intimate knowledge of your show. You're going to hear things when you play it back for editing. You'll be training your brain not to say, as much as I do. So I edit out in every podcast, but every time I'm like, darn it. And it trains my brain not to utilize those 2 words. I guess isn't even a word. However, those 2 syllables together, making the editing process easier. But you might hear background noise you don't hear when you're recording. I have 2 dogs. I do my best to remember to take their collars off when I record because the dog tag jingles and makes noise. And when I hear that in post, it just reinforces the mindset to remove their collars, like I did today, before I start recording. And then the editing process too. You're also going to learn what compression is and what gain is. And you're going to be able to learn the nuts and bolts of audio to where you can implement things while you're recording so you have less to do in post-production. But learn to edit. It's not that hard. It doesn't take a lot of time, and it offers valuable lessons that you can learn to improve the quality of your show overall. Number 7, always do a sound check. I turn my mixer on. I open whatever software I'm utilizing to record my show. Today I'm using Audacity. I am learning to record and edit directly into Adobe Audition. However, I'm not that comfortable with it yet enough to record and edit a full show in Audition. So while I'm learning, I use Audacity. I turn the mixer on. I open up Audacity. You can click the levels bar and start speaking through your mic and see the green bars bounce up and down and find out where your decibels are laying consistently. I run through Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers because those peas are explosives and they peak that meter. And I ensure they're not getting into the red. A little bit of yellow, I'm okay with. I can also do, and I'm probably going to screw this up, seashells. See, I did. She sells seashells down by the seashore because S's are plosives. But this does two things for me. A, it lets me establish levels. I can adjust volumes. I can adjust preamp compression. I can get everything dialed in and make sure I'm ready to record. Number one. Number two, it warms my voice up a little bit and stretches those vocal cords out a little bit. So I come across hopefully a little crisper. Let me know in the comments. But I run through those few phrases multiple times. If I have a guest on the show, I don't ask them to do the tongue twisters. However, I do engage in a couple minutes of conversation with them so I can get their levels adjusted before it hits the recording software, so I can make sure they're going to come across high volume enough and compressed enough, and the bass is good, treble's good, so on and so forth. But always do a sound check before you start recording. Number 8. This is a process that I recently started, and it's time consuming, but the value that it offers is worth it, in my opinion, on some of my shows. So what we do is we record the episode. I go in and do a rough edit, get rid of ums and buts and bloopers and all of that stuff, and make sure junk is cut out of the show. And then we listen to it back, the host and co-host. And they might say, at minute number 9 to minute number 11, we want to re-record that. Awesome. So we re-record that. Now, this creates more work in the editing phase. However, the end result is just worth the time and effort that you're putting into it. So give it a try. If you have the time, give it a try. But record, do a rough edit, listen to the entire show back. And if you feel points weren't made, add them. If you feel this section needs to be re-recorded, re-record it and edit it in. And you'll be amazed at the quality of the show, and you'll be happy you put that extra time in if the show requires that type of attention. And last but not least, engage. Engage with your audience. I ask you all the time to hit me if you have questions, concerns, problems, criticisms. I want to hear from you. So if you take the time to send me an email and I don't even acknowledge it, that's bad on me. So I answer every single email, and I take constructive criticism, damaging criticism. I take it all in because I want to create the best show that I can for you. So I take it all in, I engage, I reply, I acknowledge. Take that mentality to Facebook. If somebody takes the time to leave a comment on Facebook, I acknowledge, at least acknowledge it, maybe reply to it, depending on what the comment was. Twitter, Instagram, same thing. If you, the listener, is going to take the time to send me a note, I'm going to at least acknowledge it. And that is something that people lack across the board. Social media. Social is the key word, and it takes two to socialize, at least 2. So if they're taking the time, you should at least acknowledge and or reply. So those are the 9 points I wanted to cover to improve your podcast, your listenership, your engagement, your presence on the internet. Let me know what you think about this episode at brian@idpodcastthat.com. You can also leave me a review in iTunes, Google Play, whatever podcast player you're subscribed through. I'd love to hear from you. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And again, a special shout out to Sitch Radio. Thank you for all you do for the podcasting community. Till next time, talk soon.